They laughed at him before he ever touched the truck. Not because he was wrong, but because he was black, homeless, and standing in front of a glass-walled shop where men in clean uniforms decided who mattered. For 4 months, a $1 million truck sat dead in the center of a luxury repair facility. Certified experts failed. Expensive machines failed. Pride got louder. Then a man everyone had learned to ignore spoke 5 words that froze the room. "I know how to fix it." What followed wasn't just about an engine roaring back to life. It was about a gate opening, a truth being exposed, and a moment that forced powerful people to confront something far more broken than a machine. Because when the engine finally started, the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. This isn't a story about a truck. It's a story about who gets believed and what happens when the wrong person is finally right. The first thing people noticed about Caleb Monroe was not his age or the quiet intelligence in his eyes. It was his skin, dark, weathered by years under open skies, dark enough that people crossed the street when they saw him coming, dark enough that security guards watched him longer than anyone else, dark enough that, no matter how calmly he spoke, his words were always heard as trouble. Every weekday at noon, Caleb walked the same stretch of South Michigan Avenue in Chicago, dragging a thin blanket and a plastic bag that held everything he owned. To most people, he was just another homeless black man blending into the city's background noise. Invisible, unwelcome, easily dismissed. But Caleb had a routine. Every day without fail, he stopped in front of Halverson Elite Truck Service. The building didn't look like a repair shop. Floor-to-ceiling glass, polished concrete, chrome signage. Inside, technicians in spotless Navy uniforms worked under LED lights, their movements precise, rehearsed, expensive. This wasn't a place for grease-stained hands and guesswork. This was a temple of efficiency, and parked at the center of it all was the reason Caleb stopped every day. A Mercedes-Benz Actros imported from Europe. Custom-built, nearly new, and completely dead. For 4 months, that truck hadn't moved an inch. Caleb watched as mechanics plugged in diagnostic scanners worth more than his entire life. He watched parts get swapped, reprogrammed, replaced. He watched frustration harden into embarrassment. He watched the same conclusion over and over. It doesn't make sense. Caleb knew exactly what made sense. He knew because he'd fixed trucks like that long before people stopped looking him in the eye. Inside the office overlooking the shop floor, Richard Halverson stood with his arms crossed, jaw tight, mid-50s, silver hair, tailored suit that cost more than Caleb earned in a decade, back when he still had earnings to count. Richard hated failure. He hated excuses. He hated delays. And he hated that this truck, the symbol of his success, was humiliating him. "I don't care what it costs," Richard snapped at his operations manager, Ethan Brooks. "I didn't build a freight empire to be outsmarted by a machine." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we've flown in specialists from Detroit and Milwaukee. Even Mercedes support." "Then find better ones," Richard cut in, "because right now this place looks incompetent." Below them, mechanics pretended not to hear. Caleb saw it all through the glass. The anger, the pride, the fear behind the arrogance. He also saw the mistake. It wasn't electronic. It wasn't software. It wasn't something a computer would ever catch. It was a flaw you only noticed if you'd spent years listening to engines instead of reading screens. That Tuesday, something inside Caleb snapped. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe it was the sound of another black man being treated like he didn't belong. Because Caleb knew that tone. He'd lived inside it for years. When the mechanic stepped away, defeated again, Caleb walked toward the gate. The security guard, Mark Reynolds, stepped in front of him instantly. "Hey, you can't be here." Caleb's voice was calm. "I need to talk to the owner." Mark laughed, quick and sharp. "Man, you need to move along." "I can fix the truck." Mark blinked, then laughed harder. "Sure you can." But the laughter carried. Richard turned. He saw the man at the gate, the dirty jacket, the untrimmed beard, the black skin that, in his mind, already answered every question. "You said you can fix my truck?" Richard called out, amused. Caleb met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." The shop went quiet. Richard walked closer, smile widening, not with hope but with mockery. "Let me get this straight," he said loudly. making sure everyone could hear. 5 certified technicians couldn't fix it. Engineers from Europe couldn't fix it. And you, he gestured at Caleb, eyes scanning him with open disdain. You think you can? Caleb didn't raise his voice. I know I can. A few mechanics exchanged glances. One of them, Frank Dalton, the oldest on the team, frowned. Not amused, curious. Richard clapped once, slow, sarcastic. This should be entertaining. Ethan leaned in. Sir, this is a bad idea. No, Richard said. This is perfect. He turned back to Caleb. I'll make you a deal. If you can fix it, I'll pay you double whatever you ask. And if I can't? Caleb asked. Richard's smile hardened. Then you walk out and never come back. The gate slid open. As Caleb stepped inside, conversation stopped. Some people stepped back. Someone whispered. The air felt heavier, not because of grease or oil, but because of judgment. Caleb walked toward the truck. He ignored the looks. He ignored the whispers. He placed a hand on the steel frame like greeting an old friend. Open the hood, he said. Richard raised an eyebrow, then nodded. As the engine was exposed, Caleb's eyes moved with quiet confidence. No hesitation, no confusion, just recognition. He knelt, crawled beneath the chassis, and stayed there longer than anyone expected. Richard checked his watch. Taking a nap down there? He called out. Caleb slid back out, grease now staining his sleeves. The problem isn't the engine, he said. It's the wiring harness feeding the crankshaft position sensor. Cold solder joint. Intermittent signal loss. Silence. Frank's eyes widened. That wouldn't show on diagnostics? It wouldn't, Caleb agreed. That's why you missed it. Richard's smile vanished. You're guessing, he said. No, Caleb replied. I'm remembering. He looked Richard straight in the eye. Let me replace it. For the first time, Richard hesitated, not because he believed him, but because something about the way this black man spoke, steady, precise, unafraid, made the laughter die in his throat. Do it, Richard said finally. Prove me wrong. Caleb reached for the tools, and as the shop held its breath, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about a truck anymore. This was about who gets believed, who gets heard, and how many chances a man is allowed before the world decides he's done. Before we continue, have you ever felt underestimated because of who you are or where you come from? Yes or no? Do you think one opportunity can truly change a life? Yes or no? Share your answer below. Your voice matters more than you think. The first bolt Caleb Monroe loosened made a sound so soft most people didn't notice it. But Frank Dalton did. Frank had spent 30 years under hoods and chassis, long before tablets replaced wrenches. He watched the way Caleb's hands moved. Not rushed, not uncertain, but deliberate, like muscle memory waking up after a long sleep. This guy's not guessing, Frank muttered under his breath. Across the shop, Richard Halverson stood rigid, arms folded, jaw tight. His eyes never left Caleb, but not in admiration. It was suspicion mixed with something sharper, discomfort. Because every second Caleb worked calmly was another second Richard felt exposed. Caleb asked for a Torx T20, a flashlight, and an extension. No hesitation, no over-explaining. The tools arrived slower than necessary. Someone had to be told twice. Another mechanic wiped his hands too long before passing them over. Caleb noticed. He always did. That pause, that look, that unspoken question people asked with their eyes when a black man sounded too confident. He slid beneath the Actros again. Time stretched. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Richard checked his watch again, louder this time. You said 20. See, Caleb's voice came from under the truck, steady. I said maybe less. The shop was silent except for metal clicking against metal. No music, no conversation. Even the usual shop noise seemed to hold back. When Caleb emerged, grease streaked his forearms. He held up the wiring harness. Here, he said, pointing. See the micro fracture in the solder joint? Frank leaned closer. His face changed instantly. I'll be damned, he whispered. The crack was almost invisible, too small for scanners, too inconsistent to trigger permanent faults. It explained everything. Richard stepped forward. That doesn't mean anything, he said sharply. Plenty of parts have cosmetic defects. Caleb met his eyes. That defect tells the system the engine isn't ready to fire. No signal, no fuel release. Silence again. Replace it, Richard snapped. Let's see. Caleb installed the new harness with surgical precision, tightened each bolt with exact pressure, rerouted the cables to avoid tension. Then he stepped back. You can start it. For a moment, no one moved. Then Frank climbed into the cab. The dashboard lit up. A collective breath was held. Frank turned the key. Nothing. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Richard's face. I knew. Then the engine roared to life. Not a cough, not a stutter. A full, clean ignition. The sound filled the shop like thunder. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed in disbelief. Ethan dropped his clipboard. Frank sat frozen behind the wheel. It's perfect. Caleb didn't smile. Richard didn't breathe. The engine idled smoothly, like it had never been broken at all. Richard stared at the truck, then at Caleb, the man he had laughed at, the man he had reduced to a spectacle. Turn it off, Richard said quietly. The engine shut down. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. Richard walked toward Caleb slowly. He stopped too close, invading his space the way powerful men often did without realizing it. Who are you? He asked. Caleb wiped his hands on his jacket. Someone you didn't see. That answer landed harder than an insult. Richard swallowed. How much do you want? Caleb didn't respond immediately. He looked around the shop, at the spotless floors, at the men who had avoided his eyes when he walked in, at the glass walls separating wealth from worth. I don't want your money. That caught Richard off guard. What? I want a job, Caleb said. A real one. A murmur rippled through the room. Ethan frowned. Sir, we can't. Richard raised a hand, eyes still locked on Caleb. You don't have papers, a background check, references. Caleb nodded. I have experience. That's not the same thing. No, Caleb said calmly. It's more. Richard felt something crawl up his spine. Anger, shame. He wasn't sure which. You expect me to hire a homeless black man off the street? Richard said, his voice edged now. Based on one fix? Caleb's jaw tightened. You let 5 certified experts fail for 4 months, he replied. You watched your money bleed. I fixed it in 15 minutes. The shop felt like it might split in half. Frank stepped forward. He's right, he said. That diagnosis was elite level. Richard shot him a look. I don't recall asking you. No, Frank replied, but you should have. Richard turned back to Caleb. His pride was cracking now, and cracks scared him. What happened to you? He asked abruptly. Caleb hesitated, just a second. My wife got sick, he said quietly. Cancer. I sold everything. When she died, I fell apart. The world doesn't wait for black men to grieve. No one laughed. No one moved. Richard felt heat behind his eyes. Not sympathy, he wasn't there yet, but recognition. He had judged this man by his skin, his clothes, his silence, and he had been wrong. You start Monday, Richard said finally. Ethan's head snapped up. Sir? Monday, Richard repeated. Temporary, probationary. Caleb nodded once. That's enough. Richard extended his hand. For a moment, Caleb hesitated. Then he shook it. The grip was firm, equal. Richard pulled his hand back quickly, as if realizing too late what that gesture meant. As Caleb turned to leave, Frank called out, Hey! Caleb looked back. You didn't just fix a truck, Frank said. You shook this place. Caleb gave a small nod and walked out into the cold Chicago air. Outside, traffic rushed past like nothing had changed. But inside the shop, everyone knew it had. Because a man they dismissed had proven something terrifyingly simple. Competence doesn't care about color, and arrogance doesn't survive truth. Monday morning came faster than Caleb Monroe expected. At 6:30 a.m., he stood across the street from Halverson Elite Truck Service, the city still half asleep. The glass facade reflected a man he barely recognized. He had washed at a highway rest stop, trimmed his beard with borrowed clippers, and pressed his jacket flat with his palms. It wasn't a miracle makeover. It was simply dignity returning, one small choice at a time. He crossed the street when the light changed. Inside, the shop felt different, quieter, less performative. Frank Dalton greeted him first, not with curiosity this time, but with a nod that meant respect. Someone handed Caleb a locker key. Another pointed him to the break room without hesitation. No one asked why he was there. That mattered. By noon, a problem rolled in that 2 technicians had already logged as intermittent, unresolved. A delivery truck stalled only when fully loaded, only on turns. Caleb listened, not to the complaint, but to the pauses between words. He took the keys, drove a short loop with weight in the back, felt the pull, the hesitation. He didn't raise his voice when he returned. "It's the rear pressure regulator," he said. "Out of calibration under load." They fixed it. The driver shook Caleb's hand and said, "3 shops missed that." Caleb thanked him and went back to work. Upstairs, Richard Halverson watched through the glass. He saw the ease with which the shop began to orbit around Caleb, not because Caleb demanded attention, but because solutions followed him. It unsettled Richard. He had built an empire on certainty and control, and here was a man who proved that certainty could be wrong and control could be learned. That afternoon, Richard called Caleb into his office. "Sit," Richard said, then stopped himself. "Please." Caleb noticed. Richard folded his hands. "You saved a client today. That account alone pays 6 figures a year." "I did my job," Caleb replied. "No," Richard said quietly. "You did what my systems couldn't." He paused. Pride wrestled with truth. Truth won. "I judged you," Richard said. "I didn't just underestimate you. I dismissed you." Caleb didn't interrupt. "I don't want this place to be the kind of shop where that happens again," Richard continued. "To anyone. Change didn't arrive all at once. It never does. But it began there." Richard ended the yelling. He funded training. He asked questions he used to ignore. He listened, awkwardly at first, when people spoke. The shop grew steadier, calmer. Productivity rose. So did morale. Weeks passed. Caleb arrived early every day and left late without complaint. He trained younger techs. He explained problems instead of hoarding solutions. When a mechanic joked poorly about street smarts, Caleb corrected him without anger, naming the thing out loud so it couldn't hide anymore. The joke didn't come back. One evening, Frank found Caleb alone in the bay, wiping down tools. "You're changing this place," Frank said. Caleb shook his head. "I'm just being myself." "That's the change," Frank replied. 3 months later, Richard made another decision. He brought his attorney, Thomas Keller, into the office and slid a folder across the desk. Caleb opened it and froze. Partnership papers, 15%. "I can't," Caleb said, standing. "I won't take charity." "It isn't charity," Richard said. "It's accountability. You made this place better. You should own part of that." Caleb sat slowly. "Why?" Richard looked out the window. "Because success without humanity is just noise. And because my daughter asked me why I look different lately, I told her the truth. I told her I learned something from a man I almost laughed out of the room." Caleb signed. The announcement went out that afternoon. Applause broke the ceiling. Some people cried. Others just smiled, relieved. That night, Caleb called a shelter he used to know. "I'm not calling for me," he said. "I'm calling because talent doesn't disappear when people fall. It just waits." The circle widened. 6 months after the Actros roared back to life, the shop hosted a community open house. Kids climbed into cabs. Parents asked questions. Drivers shared stories. Richard stood beside Caleb and introduced him without qualifiers. Not as a miracle, not as a symbol, as a partner. When the crowd thinned, they stood by the red truck that had started everything. "I thought the problem was mechanical," Richard said. Caleb smiled. "It rarely is." They stood there quietly. 2 men who had met on opposite sides of a gate, now on the same side of a future. Caleb thought of all the times he had been invisible, of how easy it was for the world to decide who mattered. He also thought of how fragile that decision was, how quickly it could be undone by truth, by skill, by a single chance. He didn't believe in fairy tales. He believed in work, in opportunity, in naming bias so it could be dismantled, in endings that weren't perfect but were honest. And that, he knew, was enough. Before you go, how did this story make you feel? Do you think one opportunity can really change a life? Did this story challenge how you see people who are often overlooked? If you like this story, comment 111 below to let us know. Tell us what country you're watching from. And if this message matters to you, please share this video so it can reach someone who needs it today.